when you've got a bunch of parties on the progressive side standing with you than it is for the Conservatives to push their own agenda. Here's the Prime Minister of Canada.
We're making progress in the fight against COVID-19, but we have to remember that the situation remains very serious. We're not out of the woods yet. As we move into the summer, we'll have to keep adjusting our routines. Our cities will have to adjust and change, and our approach will have to be tailored to each community. That means the rules and public health recommendations you're asked to follow may be different depending on where you live, and that can be confusing. But right across the country, one thing will stay the same. Everyone has a responsibility to themselves and to the people around them. So keep practicing physical distancing. This is how we protect ourselves, protect our loved ones, and protect the most vulnerable. Moving forward with reopening must happen gradually and carefully. And the right safeguards must be in place, including testing and contact tracing. This is key to keeping us safe and keeping the situation under control. What reopening means for you and for your family will be different for everyone. Just take the realities facing small business owners. Some are ready to open their doors as soon as they get the green light that it's safe to do so. But for many more, getting back on their feet will be a challenge. And one of the biggest concerns is paying rent. That's why we created the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. This benefit will provide forgivable loans to landlords so that they can lower rent by 75% for small businesses hit hardest by COVID-19. It will also be available to nonprofit and charitable organizations. As of 8 o'clock this morning, applications have now opened. If you're a landlord with up to 10 eligible tenants and you're located in the Atlantic, BC, Alberta, or Quebec, you can apply today at cmhc.ca. For landlords in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and the Territories who have up to 10 eligible tenants, tomorrow's your day to apply. Landlords with more than 10 tenants will be able to apply later this week. To landlords, please apply. And to business owners, make sure you're holding up your end of the bargain as well. The Canada Emergency Business Account can help you pay your rent on time. And the wage subsidy, which we're extending through the summer, can help you rehire your workers. We're all in this together, and together is how we're going to get through it. Depuis 8 heures ce matin, les
As of 8
propriétaires de
o'clock this
logements
morning, property owners can apply on the website of the Canada Housing Corporation to receive the Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. For owners with up to 10 eligible tenants in Quebec, British Columbia, Alberta, or the Atlantic, you are able to apply today. Tomorrow, owners in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and the Territories will be able to apply. And owners with more than 10 tenants will be able to apply later this week. Whether we're talking about this rent relief or the wage subsidy, we have introduced a number of programs for businesses, and we continue to find other ways to support them. Today, I can tell you that we are launching a phone line with the Canada Chamber of Commerce to help you navigate this uncertain time. Entrepreneurs and vulnerable small businesses, including charities and nonprofit organizations, will be able to receive the assistance of an accountant or financial advisor by calling the Resiliency Help Desk at 1-866-989-1080. This initiative is particularly addressed to organizations that may not have access to financial advice. And in order to take off some of the pressure during the tax system, we are also pushing back the deadline for some tax returns. If you have to file a T2 return or a Trust T3 return in June, July or August, now you will have until September the 1st to file those returns.
Every day, in every part of the country, hardworking Canadians build prosperity and growth in their communities. To come out of this crisis, our country needs workers, people like you, more than ever. Our government knows that. And we know that you deserve to be treated fairly on the job. This is something that I spoke with the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, about yesterday. Nobody should have to choose between taking a day off work due to illness or being able to pay their bills. Just like nobody should have to choose between staying home with COVID-19 symptoms or being able to afford rent or groceries. That's why the government will continue discussions with the provinces without delay on ensuring that as we enter the recovery phase of the pandemic, every worker in Canada who needs it has access to 10 days of paid sick leave a year. And we'll also consider other mechanisms for the longer term to support workers with sick leave.
Nobody should have to choose between taking sick leave or paying their bills. Just like no one should have to choose between staying at home because they have symptoms of COVID-19 or being able to pay their rent or their groceries. And that's why the government is continuing its discussions with the provinces to ensure that when we begin the recovery, every individual will have access to 10 paid days of sick leave a year. We will also be looking at other longer-term mechanisms to support workers who need sick leave.
Later today, I will be back in Parliament as we continue moving forward with our plan to get Canadians the support they need. Whether you're an employer or an employee, we're working to make sure you can focus on what matters most. Getting back to work safely, adapting to new realities, and keeping yourself and others safe. You will drive our recovery, and as you do, we'll be in your corner every step of the way. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions par le téléphone. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. First question, Christy Kirkup, The Globe and Mail. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. What is your explanation to Canadians today about why your wealthy political party is accepting taxpayer money during this crisis in the form of the wage subsidy?
We know families across the country depend on the jobs that they do to pay groceries, pay for the rent. That's why we put in place a wage subsidy that is available to small businesses, large businesses, nonprofits, and charities to be able to support people who might otherwise be laid off. This is going to be an important part of the economy bouncing back, and that's what we're focused on.
As a follow-up?
When your government created the wage subsidy criteria, did you anticipate that political parties, including your own, would be among those applying for assistance?
We knew from the very beginning that it was going to be important to ensure that people could keep their jobs, whether they work in the private sector, whether they work for nonprofits or charities, to be able to continue to support their families and to make sure that our economy can come roaring back as quickly as possible once we're through the crisis phase of this pandemic. That's what we ensured was in place right across the economy, and we encourage companies to take on that wage subsidy because it is the best way of keeping a link between workers and the job they do that will ensure that our economy comes back when this is all done.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Raymond Filion, TVA. À vous.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Just to come back to what you talked about and your discussions with the provinces about 10 days of paid sick leave per year, can you tell us how this could work? And what will the bill be for that? Would it be employers paying the bill? Well, obviously, those are all important questions being asked, and we are now in discussions with the provinces to talk about that. We know that we're in a crisis where companies, employers do not have a huge amount of financial flexibility. So during this crisis, governments will have to take on more of the responsibility. But one of the things we'll have to think about over the longer term is that when we come out of this crisis, it might be a good idea to ensure that all workers, whatever their job may be across the country, have access to paid sick leave. And we will be working with the private sector on that as well. But for now, we're discussing this with the provinces because this is a shared area of jurisdiction. follow-up? So you might bring that in when? When could it start? This summer, for example? And I'd also like you to comment on the subsidies being used by the Liberal Party and other political parties. People are perplexed about this. Are you comfortable with this? Are you comfortable with the idea of the Liberal Party and other parties using this emergency program? That's the question. With respect to your first question, we're looking at a situation where in October or November, when people start to get colds and the winter is taking hold, we don't want to see people suddenly showing symptoms that could be COVID-19 and having to say, well, should I hide my symptoms from my employer? Because if they stay home, they're going to lose their paycheck and not be able to pay for their groceries. And we know that particularly in this situation, ensuring that in the coming months, when the recovery has taken hold, we will have that kind of flexibility and be able to ensure that people who show symptoms of COVID-19 will have the choice of staying home in order not to spread COVID to others. And that's the work we have to do to prevent the spread. On your second question, the wage subsidy is there to allow people to keep that connection to their job, whether they're working for a private company or a charity or another type of organization. So if people depend on their job and they want to continue to keep that job and be able to go back when the economy has recovered, well, that's why we brought in the wage subsidy and made it available to businesses, but also to nonprofit organizations and charities.
Merci. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to continue on that second topic, particularly the wage subsidy used by your party and the other political parties. That has not been well thought of by many Canadians. Now, Mr. McKay and Mr. O'Toole say that this is not right, and that if they were leaders, one or the other, they would not even be using it. Now, you and the Liberal Party are using this. You're the Liberal Party leader. Now, do you think that the Liberal Party should not be using that subsidy? Well, I recognize that in a leadership race in the Conservative Party, various candidates will be making various proposals. And I do not generally comment on internal debates in other parties. Now, we introduced the wage subsidy in order to help workers in private companies or in working for nonprofit corporations. Their families depend on those checks. And in order for the recovery to be strong, we need people to keep that job attachment so that they can go back to their jobs when we've recovered. And that's why we created it. With all due respect, I'm not asking you to comment on that. I'm asking you, as the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, whether you want the Liberal Party to not make use of that subsidy. And what do you say to Canadians who think that you have millions of dollars in your coffers and yet you're taking advantage of a federal wage subsidy for companies that have no money? Well, the reality is that there are workers in all types of industries and all types of organizations right across the country who depend on that job, who depend on their job and their salary to help their family and pay for their groceries and rent. And we made the decision to ensure that that wage subsidy would be accessible to businesses and nonprofit organizations. That is a decision that will allow the economy to come back strong afterwards, and I believe it was the right decision because we must be able to support Canadians, whatever organization or company they work for.
Merci. Thank you, operator. Last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. From Stephanie Levitz, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Your government, as well as provincial and local ones, ask Canadians to make pretty big sacrifices to curb the spread of COVID-19 in order to give the healthcare system time to get ready. When we look at federal procurement data, it suggests you've obtained anywhere from about 0.6% to 23% of the goods you set out to buy to help equip the hospitals and frontline workers. So I'm wondering if you have confidence that the system is in fact ready for a potential second wave.
We have received over 40 flights of PPE into Canada over the past weeks, and will continue to receive flights almost every single day. The amount of PPE we're procuring from international sources continues to increase, while at the same time we are ramping up domestic production of things like masks and gowns and ventilators, the kinds of things that are actually necessary to handle that second wave. We know there's lots more to do, but we have been delivering on the needs that we're seeing right across the country.
We know that the recovery will depend on having the necessary protective equipment for workers on the front line, but also workers in other industries. And that's why we are pursuing our efforts to bring in and procure the necessary PPE. We have already received some 40 flights of PPE, and we will be receiving more equipment soon. And we are also ramping up our domestic production capacities so that we have enough protective equipment for a potential second wave.
Yeah, as a follow-up on a different topic, the Information Commissioner has asked both you and the President of the Treasury Board to send a very direct message to your ministries that they need to be proactively open and accountable during the pandemic. Why have you not delivered such a message?
We have made transparency and openness a watchword of this government from the very beginning. And with every announcement I make, with every announcement the ministers make on help for Canadians, we've been absolutely transparent on the investments we're making as we move forward. But we recognize there's always more to do in terms of openness and transparency, and we will continue to demonstrate that with Canadians, because we know fundamentally there's an issue of trust and of confidence. And if Canadians can continue to have confidence that their government is working hard for them, they will know that continuing to follow public health recommendations, continuing to know that they're going to be supported as we move through this pandemic, will leave us all better off as we begin to recover.
We know that openness and transparency are essential in order to keep public trust. When people know that their government and that their governments are being open with them and openly talking about everything they're doing, they will have confidence not only in their future, but that the system will be there to protect them. And then the economic recovery will be that much easier.
You said in your statement that the government is continuing discussions with the provinces on paid sick leave. Where do those talks stand? Do you think that all the provinces are on board with this? And how do you see a national system for paid sick leave? How do you see that working?
The issue of paid sick leave is one that was first brought up a number of weeks ago on our First Minister's call by Premier Horgan of British Columbia, who pointed out quite rightly that when the fall comes and flu season starts up, we don't want people who develop a sniffle to suddenly worry that, well, they really shouldn't go into work, but they can't afford to not go into work. And therefore, the risk of contributing to a second wave significantly could be a real problem. That's why a number of premiers have agreed that we do need to look at ways of encouraging people who begin to exhibit symptoms of COVID-19 to be able to stay home for a day or two, for the time necessary to be able to get themselves tested and possibly treated. These are things that will be essential in our recovery if we are to control the spread of COVID-19. The mechanisms are challenging, and that's why we have to work with the provinces. We've put forward a number of mechanisms to support people who've lost their job because of COVID-19, but the Canada Emergency Response Benefit is doled out in chunks of 4 weeks. And we recognize there is a need for a shorter period of time. So discussions with the provinces around paid sick leave, we're talking about 10 days over the course of the year, could be significant help, and that's what we've agreed to lead with the provinces. Okay. il y a une couple de semaines, le Premier
A
ministre
couple of
Horgan
weeks
de la
ago,
Colombie-Britannique
Premier
a souligné
Horgan of British Columbia pointed out that it would be important, particularly in the fall when the flu season starts, that people who are starting to exhibit potential symptoms of COVID-19 be able to stay home and not feel obligated to go to work because they need money. So the idea of providing for sick leave up to 10 days of paid sick leave per year will require that we work with the provinces. A couple of provinces are interested because they realize that it could be a problem if people feel forced to go back to work even if they're ill. So this is a conversation that is ongoing, and the mechanisms will have to be worked on with them so that we can figure out exactly how that can work.
Testing and tracing, you were promising federal support for that last week. Is there any update on that? Have any other provinces taken you up on it? And how fast do you think we can get testing numbers up and contact tracing up?
Well, one of the challenges we're seeing right now is the laboratory capacity is significant across the country to ramp up testing in a large way. We need to improve uptake. We need to ensure a reliable supply of swabs and reagents, which the federal government is delivering for on the provinces. These are things that are elements of the ramping up of testing and contact tracing. We've seen a number of provinces work very closely with us to be able to ramp up either their immediate testing capacity or else solidify their surge capacity, because even though the numbers may be under control in their regions right now, they recognize that if a second wave hits, they need to be able to respond extremely quickly, and that's what we're ensuring they'll be able to do. Nous savons que le dépistage
We know
et
that
la recherche des contacts
testing and contact tracing are essential to reopening the economy, and that's why we're working with the various provinces to make sure that we have the necessary capacity, including in our laboratories, but also in terms of personal protective equipment and the ability to do the testing. Now, some provinces currently have the virus under control, but they need to be able to respond quickly if there's a resurgence of the virus, and that's what we're providing them.
Prime Minister Janet Silver, Global News. I'm wondering how concerned you may be with regards to some of the mixed messages in terms of wearing masks, the virus itself, and with businesses reopening and rules relaxing somewhat, along with the warmer weather, especially when we see events or situations like we saw over the weekend with regards to Toronto at Trinity Bellwood Park. What are your thoughts?
I think Canadians have demonstrated over these past 2 months just how serious we all are about ensuring that we slow the spread of COVID-19, that we get this virus under control. I think it is natural for, as we begin to see the economy reopening, for people to be a little confused about what it is they can do, what it is they can do, what it is they shouldn't do. And that's why we're really going to continue to impress upon people the importance of making smart decisions, of wearing a mask where physical distancing isn't possible, of ensuring that at all times you are keeping 2 meters apart from other people. There are going to need to be adjustments as we move forward. Various municipalities and cities might have to bring in different rules to help things happen. But ultimately, we all need to be in this together. We have to do smart things to keep ourselves, to keep our families, to keep our loved ones, to keep our frontline workers safe. We do not want to see a resurgence of the virus. We do not want to see our healthcare systems overloaded. We have demonstrated as Canadians that we can do this. We just need to remain vigilant because we have to continue being very careful throughout the coming months. Okay. Nous savons que on est dans une bonne
We know
situation en
that
tant
we
que
are
pays.
currently in a good situation as a country because Canadians followed the recommendations. Generally speaking, they have been keeping their distance of 2 meters from others, and they have stayed home. As the economy starts to reopen and the weather is getting better, people will want to do more. But they'll have to be very careful and continue to keep 2 meters distance from others. Some municipalities and some locations will have to adjust their rules to ensure that we don't see a resurgence of COVID-19. But I know that Canadians want to do the right thing, that they want to protect their friends and their loved ones and our healthcare workers. So we will all have to remain very vigilant and follow the public health advice and keep ourselves and others
I'd
healthy.
like to turn to Hong Kong now. Given China's proposed national security laws on Hong Kong, other than voicing concerns, what can Canada do practically to encourage the protection of democratic freedoms in Hong Kong?
Well, we put out a very strong statement with a number of our allies of real concern for the situation in Hong Kong. I think it's important to support the citizens of Hong Kong, including 300,000 Canadians, who really want to see the one country, two systems approach to Hong Kong and China continue. It is going to be important for the Chinese government to engage in constructive conversations with citizens of Hong Kong to ensure that we de-escalate the tensions, and we look forward to a path that actually allows for prosperity in a way that the citizens of Hong Kong expect.
Ian Wood, CTV News. Prime Minister, last Friday, the UK government said that it would be further reviewing Huawei's involvement in the 5G network and phasing it out completely by 2023, leaving Canada the last of the Five Eyes to really make a decision on Huawei's involvement. Are you still considering their involvement in the 5G network, and when can we expect a decision?
On this issue, we have been taking advice from our security officials. We have been working with them to ensure what is the right path forward for Canada is followed. We are working closely with our allies and watching what they do to make sure that we are all doing the things necessary to both create economic opportunities and growth for our country while making sure that safety and security of our infrastructures, our businesses, and our people is tantamount. Nous allons continuer de travailler avec
We
nos
will
agences.
continue to work with our intelligence agencies with respect to the 5G network, and we will be making the right decisions for the country and for Canadians and for our institutions, of course, in consultation with our allies.
Given the reduced parliamentary sittings and the focus on coronavirus, how is your government going to advance legislation on non-COVID-19 matters like gun control or assisted dying, which is up for a court-ordered review?
I think obviously work still continues throughout the government on important non-COVID priorities. But right now in Parliament, the focus needs to be on this crisis that has taken over almost every aspect of Canadians' lives and of our economy. We will continue to work to address the needs that Canadians face both through this health crisis and into the economic challenges as we begin to recover from this COVID-19 crisis. It's important that we have a Parliament and institutions that function well, and that's what we are continuing to demonstrate. Okay. Nous avons un gouvernement qui continue.
We have a government that continues to work on many different issues that are not connected to COVID-19, but the priority in Parliament and the priority for Canadians is really to ensure that our response to this crisis, whether it's in terms of health care or in terms of our potential economic recovery, obviously there's a lot of debate to be had on that, and that's what we will continue to do and emphasize in Parliament. Christian Noël, Radio-Canada. I'd like to come back to the 10 days of paid sick leave. Would it be only if an individual is afraid that they might have COVID or is infected or tests positive for COVID? And also, what about the bill? Will that probably be shared with the provinces? And how much do you think it'll cost the federal government? Well, these are discussions that are ongoing at this time with the provinces, but the concept is really quite simple. If someone starts to show symptoms of the flu or COVID-19 and doesn't know which one it is, that person should not feel obligated to go to work in order to support their family. We want to remove that vector of transmission that will occur if people in jobs, particularly in low-paid jobs, feel that they have to go to work even though they have symptoms of COVID-19. And it's a challenge, not just a theoretical challenge for a society that has to look after the most vulnerable, but it is actually a concrete challenge in the midst of this crisis. We don't want people to go back to work when they're sick. And in order to prevent that from happening, we're prepared to work with the provinces to put in place a paid sick leave program. As for the bill, the cost, well, we'll have to work on that and determine that. But the purpose is very clear. We don't want people to feel forced to go into work if they have symptoms of COVID-19. So, symptoms of COVID-19, but if someone has an injury on the leg, for example, it wouldn't apply. And what about the wage subsidy? Are you aware of the negative impact or the negative connotation that this has on Canadians when they see that political parties are using this subsidy? Do you realize that people are very upset about this? There are businesses out there, small and large. There are nonprofit organizations and charities that are all employing Canadians. And those Canadians depend on their paychecks to support their families and go and get their groceries. So we need to ensure that our economy can recover, and therefore we introduced a wage subsidy to help workers from all different types of industries so that the economy can come back strong afterwards. So this is important for Canadians, that there be a strong economic recovery, and the wage subsidy is part of the solution.
We have put in place a system to ensure that people can stay connected to their jobs so that they can continue to support their families and pay their bills while continuing to work for organizations that otherwise might have to lay people off. It's there for small businesses, it's there for big businesses, it's there for nonprofits, it's there for the charitable sector. This is something that is going to be important for the economy to come back, and that's why we put in place the wage subsidy.
Merci, c'est ce qui met à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.
All right, that is the Prime Minister of Canada on this Monday morning, in case you're still registering days of the weeks, as I am. And a significant announcement there by the Prime Minister around paid sick leave after a negotiation, I guess is the best way to put it, between the government and the NDP. The NDP's already put out a press release crying victory that it succeeded in doing this. I'll bring back Vashi and David for some analysis. So it's a commitment by Ottawa to do this, but there's a lot yet to be worked out with the provinces here, Vashi, obviously.
Yeah, very much so. And you could see it in the way that the Liberals and the way that the Prime Minister framed that commitment. So it wasn't a yes. I mean, it could be unequivocal. Yes, 100% we're doing this. It's going to happen as of this date. It was not that, but it was probably as close in political speak as you can get to that. This had been, as we were discussing previous to the Prime Minister's remarks there, something that the NDP had put forth, predicating its support of the government motion on how Parliament looks over the coming months, on whether or not the Liberals will agree to move forward on paid sick leave. The NDP wants 10 days. And what the Prime Minister said, and he even referenced the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, and their discussion, is that he will push forward with discussions with the provinces on that. He was later asked, okay, where do those discussions sit? Are you going to split the bill? Which premiers do support it? We know one for sure, that's British Columbia's John Horgan. He, in fact, has been also calling for at least a few weeks now for the federal government to do something about this. He said that if they don't, then BC will go it alone if necessary. The Prime Minister didn't name other premiers. He said there are others on board, but we don't have any specifics on that. My guess is the answer to the second question about if the bill is going to be split or if it's going to be the federal government primarily paying for it will have an impact on how the premiers decide. Sure. Otherwise, they are, of course, facing a massive cash crunch as well. All the provinces are. So a significant win, I think you can say fairly, for the NDP here. Sure. The second aspect of what they predicated their support on is support for Canadians with disabilities. We didn't hear anything from the Prime Minister to that effect, but the debate that's going on in Parliament right now and the eventual vote could still be be a ways off, so there is still time for some movement on that. The other thing that I wanted to flag was the wage subsidy, the answers the Prime Minister gave where the wage subsidy is concerned. So this is the program that was put forth a number of months ago, that the application's open. There's not been a huge uptake of yet, but it's basically for employers of all sizes, including nonprofits, to subsidize wages up to $847 a week per employee, 75% of their wages. It was revealed on Friday that 4 political parties, including the Liberals and the Conservatives, the NDP and the Green Party, are using it to pay their workers. The Prime Minister got a number of questions about that, about whether or not they designed the program knowing that they would apply. And really the only answer that he gave was sort of what we've heard him say before about the purpose of the program, that it's very much directed at keeping Canadians employed and making sure those who work for those organizations are able to benefit from it. So the focus for the federal government has long been the worker and the benefit to them. Where he didn't answer, though, was on those questions of, well, were you aware when you designed the program that you were going to benefit from it? I think my inbox has been full over the weekend of people who are struggling to access some of the programs that have sort of fallen between the cracks, who are particularly upset in the Conservative and Liberal cases, that those two parties, which did raise millions of dollars, I think $21 million for the Liberals in 2019 and $30 million for the Conservatives in 2019, that they are choosing to access these programs when they could use some of that war chest, I think will, my guess is, continue to be a subject of debate over the coming days. The Bloc's leader, Yves-François Blanchet, has been particularly critical of mostly the Conservatives, but also the Liberals for doing so. And the Prime Minister, though he provided reasoning for the program itself, didn't really explain why he felt his party should benefit from it.
No, no, he didn't at all, really. I would say it also becomes a little difficult as a political issue because so many of the parties are using it, right? The Bloc is not using it, which allows Mr. Blanchet to fire pretty openly in the direction of the other parties. On the paid sick leave, of note, apparently only employees in Quebec and PEI and those under the Canada Labour Code, so federal regulated employees, have some sort of paid sick leave. So it is not something that exists widely across the country, and the idea that you would get 10 days of paid sick leave if you had a concern that you had COVID or COVID-like symptoms and you were worried about, having to go into work, which is the absolute wrong thing to do according to public health officials, that could make a big difference to people if they can get this sorted out, David, and I guess that's where the issue lies now.
Yeah, and it's not even really about this present-day situation. If you listen to the origin story of this, as the Prime Minister tells it, John Horgan brought this up, looking ahead to the fall and the possibility of a second wave. Now, I know this in Ontario and Quebec, where the first wave is still not under control. The idea of preparing for the second wave may seem a long way off, but you have to do it at this point in time on everything from the ordering of equipment to the stockpiling of supplies to the creation and drafting of support programs that will be needed there to minimize any potential second wave impact. And Horgan has asked for it. There's an open letter written to the Prime Minister from a lot of business groups all across the country, the major ones in Ontario, the major ones in British Columbia in particular. And this is something that the Prime Minister says that should they be able to get to an agreement, and I would suggest woe be it to the Premier who stands in the way of paid sick leave for people in a pandemic, that this could be something that lasts beyond the COVID-19 age. Is this something that they look at? Is this the creation of a new national social program of some sort, as we seem to be creating one of those every 2 to 3 weeks now? It's something the Prime Minister has put squarely on the table. So we are going to need to get reaction from the various provinces, and in particular Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan, who is the chair of the Council of the Federation, which is the organization of provincial and territorial premiers that meets every year and coordinates before they sit down with the Prime Minister for the teleconference they do, typically every Thursday night during this pandemic, to see exactly where they are on this. I do know, Rosie, as Vashi has said, the financial ability of some provinces is not the same as the others, right? Like the ability of paying for some big new expensive programs. Provinces like Newfoundland and Labrador, which are really struggling financially, they may be limited on this. So whatever comes out of this, I would suspect, to make it as uniform as possible, the federal government will have to end up doing the heavy financial lifting.
Yeah, and if you look at the commercial rent program, for instance, they asked for a 25% buy-in from the provinces, so we'll see if provinces can actually pony up that much. It's really not clear how much this would cost. All right, I'll just remind viewers right now watching us on CBC News Network, you're watching the daily pandemic update. We just heard from the Prime Minister, and in a few moments' time, we will hear from federal cabinet ministers and public health officials on the picture nationally in this country of how we are doing with the pandemic. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thanks for joining us. I'll go back to Vashi and David in just a moment, but the Prime Minister also came out today to signal that commercial rent program, a rental assistance program, is now open. There are certain days of the week, depending on the province you are in, and if you are an employer with more than 10 employees, you have to wait till later on this week. But we've already know that there have been lots of questions from landlords and some hesitation even about using this program, and it has created some worry, frankly, and frustration from small business owners. Debbie Donnell is one of them, and she joins us from Montreal. We've had her on before. She owns 2 lingerie stores there, and last time we talked, she was thinking about reopening and how that would all work. We wanted to bring you back, Debbie, though, because obviously commercial rent is probably your biggest expense, I would imagine. And I wonder, having 2 stores, what you've been able to do and what your landlord has told you.
Thanks for having me back, Rosie.
Yeah,
good
to see you. Good to see you.
So the rent program, the CECRA, has been a bit of a challenge for me personally, and I know probably a lot of other business owners. The reason is that ultimately the elephant in the room, the biggest issue with it is that ultimately the small business owner is kind of has to wait for the landlord to apply and to agree to be part of the program before getting any type of benefit or subsidy paid. So it's really completely out of our hands. So when it was first announced almost a month ago, before the May rent was due, I personally contacted both my landlords. I explained the situation to them. Neither one of them have fully committed to want to participate in the program for various reasons. The biggest comment that I get is that there's a lot more red tape. They don't have the time. And I guess from their point of view, there's no real incentive. I mean, if they sign up for this program, they're going to lose 25% rent that they have to pay for. And then the small business owner would pay 25%, which would be a huge benefit, obviously, for me and for other small business owners. But it's really out of our hands. So those conversations, almost to the point of begging my landlords, were extremely humiliating. In my case, I've never had to do that before. And there's still no guarantee they're going to participate. So rent is due in another week again. And we don't have any small business owners are relying on someone else to help us. It's not easy.
So how have you paid the rent, can I ask, in the past? I guess there's probably been two rent payments. How have you paid the rent?
So the first one in April, I went into my personal line of credit to pay the rent because obviously we were mandated closed. There was no income coming in at all, like zero. And so for April, I went into my own personal line of credit. And then when May came around, I could have done that as well. But part of me is like, why am I going to keep putting myself into personal debt when I would like to work with my landlords in this program that seems like it would be a way to share some of the risk associated with the closures? Like, instead of it all being on the small business owners' shoulders, it would be, I think, fair to split it between landlords and maybe the banks, or so I don't know, someone. Why, like, I feel frustrated that it's just us who are shouldering a lot of this. And so I didn't pay my May rent as a result, because if I paid April and I pay May, there's not much incentive. Like, the leverage is gone. There's no incentive really for them to participate. So
the last time I talked to the finance minister, maybe a week ago or so, about this issue, and I had the same question. Well, why would a landlord bother doing this? And his answer is, I think you demonstrate it well. His answer is, well, you can either have no rent, which is what you did in May, or you can be guaranteed 75% of the rent, part of it backed by the government and part of it by the tenant. When you've made that case to your landlords, or if you make that case, what is the response? Because if you didn't pay in May, at least they'd get 75% in June. Is that not appealing to them?
I would think so. From my point of view, I would think so. I don't understand. So again, I think the main comments I've gotten, and again, each small business is very individual, right? So
Sure.
the communication with landlord is also very individual. For me personally, one of my landlords said, I have a bunch of various commercial properties. I'm overwhelmed with everything right now. People are leaving, people are handing in keys, closing. I just don't have the time to look into this, to apply for it, to do anything. I don't have the time. And then the other one was like, well, we've sold our building as of July 1st and we're almost on our way out. We also aren't interested. So again, I think each case is individual, but there's more than enough reason for them not to do it because they're not feeling the pinch right now, maybe. I don't know.
So what do you do then?
The same way we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you do if they don't buy into this? You've got another month's rent due not long from now. What have you already turned your mind to what that might mean for you?
Of course, this week I'm already going to have to make the dreaded phone call again and say, look, I really am not in a position to pay June's rent. Now, as of today in Montreal, we're allowed to be reopening our stores. I personally made the choice not to for various reasons. But the real issue is even if we did open, again, I have an online store that has generated a little bit of sales and my clients have been fantastic about calling in orders, but it's still well below where we normally are this time of year. So as we head into June, even if we can reopen, which we're hoping to do at one of my locations next week, the issue is, will the clients come back? Will the revenue? June and July are our busiest months. We won't be in that situation, I don't think, that we've been in the past. So again, there's still going to be a crunch. And then when we reopen, then there's employee costs, even though the subsidy's in place, which is great, the wage subsidy. It's still going to be a bit of a, it's still going to be a crunch. It's going to be tight. And I can say for myself personally, we're all maxed out business-wise on our loans. We came off our slow season, so our business lines are maxed, which is why I've had to use personal money. But there's only that'll only bring you so far.
Yeah.
And I can't keep putting my own personal financial, situation on the line continuously. So I think in all reality, there will be no rent payment in June. And hopefully I can use that as some leverage for them to try to participate in the program. Now we know more than we did a month ago, now that it's open. But again, how long will it take for them to get the money? So we don't really know right now.
Is there any chance that you could get evicted if you continue not to pay, or has that been on pause in Montreal?
I think, no, it hasn't been put on pause by the provincial government, as far as I'm aware. In every lease agreement, it always says, that if you don't make a rent payment, they have a certain number of days they can notify you, and then you have a certain number of days to pay the rent. Luckily, I have been in a situation, both my landlords have, as of May, they were pretty understanding to the situation. So I did not receive that letter. If I do receive that letter, then I'm going to have to, look where I stand and make some decisions. Because the other thing with a commercial lease is that when we sign it, it's not like a personal lease. When we sign it, we have to give all kinds of guarantees personally. So you can't just walk away. I have 2 years left on one of my leases. I'm legally on the hook, so to speak, for the rest of the payments up till the end of the lease. So so there's a lot of things to consider.
Debbie, we brought you back because you're very good at expressing the concerns that so many people are struggling with. So I hope you know that there's other people like you also worried, and we will try to keep pushing the government to get some clear answers for you. I hope the landlords are understanding in the next week or so.
Thank you. Thanks, Rosie.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it too, Debbie. We'll check back with you if you don't mind too in a few weeks and see what's how it's going. Okay. Good luck, Debbie. That's Debbie Donnell. She owns 2 lingerie shops, and she joined us from Montreal. Okay. We are waiting, as I said, to bring you the federal briefing with cabinet ministers and federal public health officials. Try and quickly squeeze in another person here because we're going to stay in Montreal because, as you heard there from Debbie, there are many stores that are allowed to reopen today. And Deborah Arbeck is the host of CBC News Montreal, and she joins me now. So stores can open. Not everyone is, but there are some stores starting to open there, Deborah.
Yeah, Rosemary, business as usual is certainly not what shoppers in the Montreal area are going to experience today. But after 2 delays, Montreal is basically open for business again. It's certainly no Black Friday atmosphere out there. People are lining up. They have long lineups in many cases ahead of them in stores in the city. The only stores that you can access right now are stores that have an exterior access. So certainly you cannot go to the mall unless there's a store at the mall that has an exterior entrance. Once people get inside at a reduced number, I mean, some stores are only allowing 1 person in at a time. They'll be accompanied by a salesperson as they do their shopping. There are stickers on the floor telling shoppers which direction to go in. There's plexiglass at the counters. It's recommended that both staff and customers wear masks as they are shopping. So far this morning, what we're hearing is that about half of customers that our reporters have been seeing are wearing those masks. Certainly shoppers happy to be back in the stores, but one of the big items seems to be running shoes. There seems to be a run on running shoes right now. It kind of makes sense, actually, because so many runners are out on the streets of Montreal these days.
Okay, Deborah, Montreal is my favorite shopping town, but I'm not coming anytime soon. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it.
All right, no problem.
Deborah Arbeck is the host of CBC News Montreal. I'm going to bring you right to the federal briefing now. Dr. Theresa Tam is speaking. Let's listen in.
9,000 people for COVID-19 to date, with about 5% of these testing positive overall. In the past week, we've been testing an average of around 22,300 people daily. These numbers change quickly and are updated regularly on canada.ca/coronavirus. This week is Paramedic Services Week, and quite fittingly, this year's theme is Pandemic, Paramedics on the Front Line. I think most of us are aware of the vital importance of paramedics in our healthcare system as first responders, providing life-saving pre-hospital care during times of greatest urgency. This week is an opportunity to further recognize the breadth and depth of expertise of paramedical practitioners from dispatch to first response to hospital. This year in particular, we are recognizing the important role paramedics play on the front lines of the healthcare system during a crisis of the scale of COVID-19. It's impossible to overstate the life-saving importance of our paramedical services. Paramedics respond to all manner of emergencies, from attending the scene of an accident to providing life-saving care during acute health and mental health emergencies. Paramedics have also been instrumental on the front lines of the opioid crisis and now the COVID-19 crisis as well. Paramedics not only provide their expertise and one-on-one human connection, but they also forge working relationships with organizations to promote patient care and improve health in our communities. I recently learned of an innovative program that was spearheaded by paramedics in Renfrew County, a rural area just outside of Ottawa. It is a joint effort of partners across the health system to preserve healthcare system capacity, while at the same time ensuring that people receive the care they need. Through a virtual triage assessment center, patients can be linked with a healthcare provider and provided with an appointment. If an in-person appointment is required, a paramedic can be dispatched to make a house call. This is a wonderful example of the health system coming together to ensure that no one is left behind, and it highlights the important role that paramedics play in linking communities to healthcare settings. This is just one example of how paramedics contribute to health and well-being across the health system and in our communities in innovative ways. This week is a great opportunity to learn more and give an extra shout out to paramedical service providers across Canada. Thank you. Merci.
Merci, Dr. Tam. Dr. New?
Thank you, Dr. Tam. Dr. New. Good afternoon. As usual, I will start with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 85,103 cases, including 6,453 deaths and 44,219 people recovered, about 52%. We have now tested in Canada over 1,479,000 people, with about 5% of them being positive. We are now testing an average of 22,000 people per day over the past week. These numbers change quickly and are updated regularly on canada.ca/coronavirus. This week is Paramedic Services Week, and quite fittingly, this year's theme is Pandemic, Paramedics on the Front Line. I think most of us are aware of the vital importance of paramedics in our healthcare system as first responders providing life-saving pre-hospital care during times of greatest urgency. This week is an opportunity to further recognize the breadth and depth of expertise of paramedical practitioners from dispatch to first response to hospital. This year, in particular, we are recognizing the important role paramedics play on the front lines of the healthcare system during a crisis on the scale of COVID-19. It's impossible to overstate the life-saving importance of our paramedical services. Paramedics respond to all manner of emergencies, from attending the scene of an accident to providing life-saving care during acute health and mental health emergencies. Paramedics have also been instrumental on the front lines of opioid crisis and now the COVID-19 crisis as well. Paramedics not only provide their expertise and one-on-one human connection, but they also forge working relationships with organizations to promote patient care and to improve health in our communities. I recently learned of an innovative program that was spearheaded by paramedics in Renfrew County, a rural area west of Ottawa. It is a joint effort of partners across the health system to preserve healthcare system capacity, while at the same time ensuring that people receive the care they need. Through a virtual triage assessment center, patients can be linked with a healthcare provider and provided with an appointment. If an in-person appointment is required, a paramedic can be dispatched to make a house call. This is a wonderful example of the health system coming together to ensure that no one is left behind, and it highlights the important role that paramedics play in linking communities to healthcare settings. This is just one example of how paramedics contribute to health and well-being across the health system and in our communities in innovative ways. This week is a great opportunity to learn more and give an extra shout-out to paramedical service providers across Canada. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. New. Mary?
So much, Jean-Yves. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde.
Good afternoon, everyone.
5 million Canadians are employed by a small business across our country. To the entrepreneurs who run these businesses, you are the key to ensuring millions of Canadians can get back to work as we take the gradual steps towards restarting our economy. You're at the heart of our communities, and that is why we're here to support you. Right now, the smallest and the most vulnerable businesses are facing additional challenges when it comes to accessing tailored financial planning advice. Today, we are launching the Business Resilience Service in partnership with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, a free hotline operated by 125 business advisors from the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada. This service provides Canadian business owners, including people who run charities and not-for-profits, with customized financial guidance who wouldn't otherwise have access to it, from navigating tax regulations and government supports to planning their path to recovery. Again, this service is meant for vulnerable small businesses with pressing financial needs and business owners who may otherwise have difficulty accessing tailored financial advice. You can now call toll-free 1-866-989-1080. This is available 7 days a week for the next 4 weeks. Nous continuerons à veiller
We will continue to ensure that all businesses are supported every step of the way through this crisis.
Which leads me to another business support launch. As you've heard, applications for the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance are now available via cmhc.ca. To help business owners as efficiently as possible, we are staggering the applications. Aujourd'hui, c'est ouvert aux propriétaires jusqu'à
Today is open to property owners with up to 10 tenants in Atlantic Canada, British Columbia, Alberta, and Quebec, and open Thursday for those with over 10 tenants.
Tomorrow is open to landlords with up to 10 tenants in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and the Territories. And Wednesday is open to those with over 10 tenants. And then on Friday, it's open to all landlords across Canada. We expect the money to flow starting next week. While rent falls under provincial responsibility, we have stepped up to partner with provinces and territories to reduce rent by 75% for businesses who've experienced severe hardship. Through this program, if you're a small business owner or an entrepreneur, you will only have to pay 25% of your rent, while we cover 50% in forgivable loans to your landlord. If you're a landlord or a commercial property owner with a small business tenant eligible for this program, we're asking you to step up and to work with us and your tenant to apply. Given these extraordinary times that we are finding ourselves, your participation in the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program will help our businesses, our workers, and our economy. And this isn't just about doing the right thing. It is also making financial sense for you as a landlord. Because if your tenant declares bankruptcy and is evicted, you will lose all the steady stream of income you depend on, and you would face additional costs while you search for new tenants. You've all heard this before, but it remains true. We are all in this together. Et il dans notre intérêt à tous de travailler ensemble.
And it's in all of our best interests to work together so we all can get through this.
We'll keep working hard to support all Canadians as we begin to restart our economy. We've got your back every step along the way. We're going to keep doing this. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Mary, d'avoir résumé deux.
Thank you, Mary, for summarizing two significant announcements from this morning. The first about the emergency commercial rent assistance for the Atlantic, for British Columbia, Quebec, and other regions. They can submit their requests in order to help small businesses who are going through extremely challenging times. Second thing for good news, we're going to be working with provinces and territories to ensure paid sick leave for workers for the next few months. We know that these next few months are going to cause a lot of insecurity, and employers are going to have to do all that they can to protect their health, that of their families, and the health of their colleagues. This paid sick leave will also allow workers to work with their employers so that they don't have to choose between protecting their own health and buying groceries. So we would like to congratulate the Canadian government for this, but also the provincial governments and the members of the House of Commons that worked hard to push this issue forward. That said, we are going to be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Exceptionally, today we're going to start with the room to give a little more time to folks on the phone. Julie.
Alors, Mr. Duclos or Ms. Ng, please. I'm just wondering how you can explain to Canadians that you're allowing employees of the Liberal Party to tap into the wage subsidy, even though you fundraise millions of dollars every year. And municipalities, for example, who have had to lay off thousands of people, can't tap into it.
Well, thank you for the question. Now, the absolute priority of the government, and I think a priority shared by most Canadians, is to support those workers and those families that are struggling through the very difficult circumstances that we are living through in the last few weeks. And that's why workers need that support, whoever they may work for, whether it's a small business, a larger business. And that's why we believe that this support is absolutely essential. It's guided by the principles of focusing on people and helping everyone go through the crisis.
As I said, municipalities can't tap into it. Naheed Nenshi of Calgary said, I wish I could tap into that program. They're laying off thousands of people. Are you going to change it so they can, for example?
Well, your very important question on municipalities is absolutely relevant. As we all know, the federal government just a few days ago did announce, either through the Prime Minister or through the Deputy Prime Minister, a real will to work with provinces and territories to see how we can support the essential work of municipalities and cities. But that needs obviously to be done in collaboration and with the full support of provinces and territories.
So not with a wage subsidy. Okay.
Ian?
Minister Duclos, same question. I mean, how do you think it looks to Canadians to see political parties taking advantage of a wage subsidy program that you put forward?
Well, I would perhaps extend my earlier question, reminding everyone again that we are absolutely focused on workers and their families. We have had just a few weeks ago a Statistics Canada report saying that almost 6 million Canadians have either lost their job and all of their income or most of their income. So the circumstances are very difficult for workers and families, and that's why the emergency wage subsidies was put into place. Now that program, as all programs put into place in a relatively rapid time period, come with conditions and restrictions and obligations for transparency, and these obligations and restrictions apply to all businesses.
Right, but that's not what I asked you. I asked you, how do you think it looks to Canadians for political parties to accept the wage subsidy when, as my colleague pointed out, municipalities can't do that, and some companies are going under even with these programs in place? So how does it look to Canadians, do you think, a political party accepting a wage subsidy program that you put forward?
Well, I believe most Canadians know someone, either in their family or in their community or a friend that has lost his or her job in the last few weeks. And when we go through these difficult circumstances, we need to look after each other and support each other. Whatever circumstances, in all cases, independently of the control of those particular workers, have led to the loss of that job and that income. So it's an absolute priority for this government to look after everyone and not to engage into discussions that might lead Canadians to feel less important than others. I think everyone is important in this particular crisis, and everyone needs to be supported according to rules and regulations that are transparent and apply to everyone.
Was the Liberal Party having to look at laying off staff without the wage subsidy?
I cannot speak for any particular organization. What I can do, however, is to speak for the vast majority of Canadians who understand that this crisis is very difficult for a large number of workers and families.
Thank you, Minister. Just a friendly reminder, that's one question, one follow-up. We'll now go to the phone. Operator?
Thank you. Merci. If you have a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. Si vous avez une question, appuyez sur l'étoile 1. The first question is from Marie Vastel Le Devoir. La parole est à vous.
Question from Le Devoir for Minister Duclos. I have a question on today's announcement on paid sick leave, which is something that you intend to negotiate with provinces. I would like to know the federal perspective on the Canadian Labour Code, which has 3 paid sick days. Would the federal government like to change its labor code in order to ensure 10 paid sick leave days in the future? Answer. The answer is yes. The Canadian government will have to work with companies under its jurisdiction, even if a lot of employees are under provincial jurisdiction. More than 70% of people work under provincial jurisdiction, but if we're inviting provinces to work with the federal government, well, we need to help the federal government to do its job as well. Follow-up question? Can you tell me if the timeline is the same for provinces? Mr. Trudeau this morning talked about hoping to reach an agreement by this fall so that there are paid sick days for people in the fall. Will you be changing the labor code by the fall at the federal level? Mr. Trudeau also said that a lot of provinces agree with the idea of having 10 guaranteed paid sick leave days. Can you tell us about Quebec? Answer. These are two separate questions, so whether it be for provincial or federal workers, there are significant steps to take. The federal government needs to work with unions, with companies, federal companies, and so things will have to be done quickly, but they will also need to respect their partners. And for provinces, well, I think it will be up to the provinces to answer this question. Throughout Canada, we need to recognize that the coming months are going to be absolutely essential. Workers sometimes need to choose between protecting their health and being able to make ends meet. And we want to avoid such a situation. We want to avoid that a worker would make the wrong decision to go back to work even though they might have COVID-19 symptoms. They're putting their own health at risk, but they're also putting their colleagues' health at risk. And so their company is also at risk of not being able to maintain its activities. That's why we need to react quickly, but we need to do things right. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Next question, operator.
Merci. Thank you. The next question is from Stephanie Levitt from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Your line is now open.
Good morning, or good afternoon, I guess. Thank you for taking the question. It's for Dr. Tam. The point, all along here of shutting down the economy, getting people to stay home and flatten this curve was to buy time for the healthcare system to get ready. And I just wonder what your assessment is of how ready the system actually is, should there be a second wave. And I know there's provincial and local differences here, but just broadly speaking, what do you think? Is the healthcare system ready?
So I think we do have to prepare for potential for another wave, and I mean we always should prepare for the fact that the second wave could even be worse than the first wave. So that's a very important question. So we know that with the collective efforts, we did not exceed the health system capacity to cope with this initial wave, this first wave. So that's obviously been a tremendous amount of work to do that. But we got to keep going to increase capacity. I know that we haven't exceeded our ICU capacity, but I think provinces are continuing to ramp up, including ventilators and other supplies. But also, of course, as everybody knows, keep going on the ramping up of personal protective equipment. That's very important should we get more patients as well. And also, generally, I would say, having learned perhaps how people have capitalized on virtual care, etc., keep going at some of those efforts that have worked, because some of those similar approaches should be continued so that you leave enough health system capacity. Of course, one of the key features of the current pandemic is the long-term care homes and seniors. So I do think that there's more work to be done in that area. Some of the long-term care homes or senior living areas haven't as yet completely extinguished their outbreaks. So that also tells us that we have to just keep going with those capacities, as well as the capacities for infection prevention and control in some of these higher risk settings, including shelters and in correctional facilities. But I think you can never be overly prepared, and that we need to just keep going with some of these capacity developments. And that goes along with lab testing as well. We're continuing to procure and including ramping up domestic capacity for some of our laboratory requirements.
Follow up.
Yeah, thank you. My follow-up is for Minister Duclos, and I wanted to ask you about accountability and transparency during COVID-19 and the report out today that's recommending more of it, frankly. Why aren't ministries releasing more information proactively? There's a lot of delays with access to information requests. What steps are you taking to really make sure Canadians are getting a full picture of what's going on with government at the moment?
Well, what you say is absolutely correct. In particular, in the context of this crisis, we need transparency and openness. Canadians need information, and I would signal that you journalists are important players, important actors in making Canadians feel informed and reassured in many instances, and that's what public servants have been trying to do for the last few weeks. Now, we understand that it's not easy, certainly not easier for public servants to provide that level of information in the current context where they face professional and personal challenges. But I've reminded my colleagues and the Secretariat, the Treasury Board Secretariat is supportive of other departments in making sure that whatever is possible is done in the current context. What I would also add is that with the Information Commissioner, I've had exchanges looking forward, making sure that we can, what we can do is, for instance, more proactive divulgation, dissemination of information, being more proactive as opposed to being reactive, and also a strong focus on technology. We are learning in this crisis the importance and the usefulness of technology and how it can perhaps lead to better ways of doing things in the future.
Thank you, Minister. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question est de Émilie Bergeron de l'agence QMI. La parole est à vous.
Question from l'agence QMI. Yes, I have a question regarding emergency rent assistance. Since the portal was opened this morning at 8 a.m., how many requests have been sent in so far?
Well, thank you for the question. As I stated earlier, we are opening up the portal in phases to a certain number of provinces today and tomorrow, with landlords that have more than 10 tenants, and then open to everyone on Friday. We are going to monitor the take-up of this, and as I said as well, the importance and the focus of this Canadian commercial rent assistance is to help our small businesses that have been hardest hit during this time so that they can manage through this period and get on that road to recovery and restart.
Émilie, en suivi.
Follow-up question. My second question is for Monsieur Duclos regarding the wage subsidy use by the Liberal Party. We understand that you want to help workers regardless of who they work for, but Canadians know that the Liberals and the Conservatives have healthy budgets. What message is this sending to Canadians when companies are struggling to pay their employees? What message does it send that traditional parties that have enough funding may have access to this assistance when others have great difficulty accessing it? What message is this sending? Answer. Thank you. The message that we've been sending from the beginning is that we want to support workers, and the wage subsidy was created for that. There are very solid and very clear criteria that ensures that the wage subsidy is given to workers. If a company uses this for something other than wages, then there would be significant consequences. 225% for the wage subsidy, which needs to be given to workers. Canadian workers and families are currently going through extremely difficult times, and that is why this subsidy was created. We want to make sure that all companies respect the rules, regardless of who they are. Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Julie, I believe you had additional questions.
C'est pour Monsieur Duclos, s'il vous plaît.
My question is for Monsieur Duclos.
In terms of, this is about the disaster that continues to be underway in long-term care homes, and specifically about Rivera, which is one of the biggest chains in the country. So I'm just wondering, I believe it is still under the Public Sector Investment Board, which reports to you, right? For Treasury Board, the Public Sector Investment Board. So I'm wondering, have you had direct talks with Rivera about improving its conditions, considering that it's got a massive lawsuit against it and all the deaths from COVID?
Thank you. Well, there are two things. One, which I cannot comment on, which is the particular circumstances and details of a lawsuit or a class action. That would be, of course, inappropriate for a minister to comment on. What I can say, however, is that, and as you all know as well, and which is very important, is that we are extremely saddened by the difficult circumstance in which many of our seniors have been going through in the last few weeks. We know that this requires a level of leadership which is in strong support of the absolutely important responsibility and jurisdiction of provinces and territories. So although we are mindful of the fact that the federal government needs to be working respectfully, we have signaled a number of times that we want to do whatever we can to support the work of provinces and territories in managing the health sector.
The Public Sector Investment Board reports to Parliament, reports to you every year. Are you going to be more diligent about what's going on in these homes, regardless of the lawsuit?
Well, I think we will be certainly more mindful of the importance of protecting our seniors, and we will use all the tools that are appropriate for the federal government to do that.
Thank you, Minister. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse pour aujourd'hui. That's it for today. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, and that's in Ottawa for today. Okay, and that is the federal briefing here in Ottawa for today. Minister, the President of the Treasury Board, Jean-Yves Duclos, leading the briefing today with public health officials and the Minister of Small Business, Mary Ng, highlighting the commercial rent program, which we were talking about earlier today, which opens over the next few days for different provinces and different employers. Lots of questions there about, again, about the wage subsidy and the use of the wage subsidy by political parties, with the exception of the Bloc Québécois, and some questions as well about this paid sick leave proposal that the Prime Minister has put on the table with the help of the NDP to talk to provinces about. All right, let's bring in Vashi Kapelis and the CBC's David Cochran. Finished a little quicker than I expected there, but that's okay. I'm sure we have lots to talk about. Let's start with the sick leave, because I do think lots of people will be interested in that, and it is a paid sick leave. So if you don't have a paid sick leave in your province, or you don't have one at your work, this would allow you to potentially tap into 10 days of paid sick leave if they can get all their ducks aligned here, Vashi, and get the provinces all on board.
Yeah, and that's what's going to be key, and that's what we'll be watching for in any negotiations that ensue. As you rightly point out, unless you live, I think it's just PEI in Quebec, right?
Yep,
that
exactly.
They have provincially covered or provincially mandated paid sick leave. It's not a lot. I think it's 1 or 2 days. Otherwise, if you're covered, for example, by your work agreement or by a collective agreement, you might have some paid sick days as well. But there isn't any sort of federally mandated or coordinated program. And what the federal Liberals have decided to do, after being asked to by both the Premier of British Columbia as well as the New Democratic Party, led by Jagmeet Singh, is pursue those conversations. That's how they're framing it with the provinces. And the Prime Minister said a little bit earlier that there isn't exactly a definite timeline on how that takes place or a decision on who pays for what, though I would imagine if the federal government is leading it, that likely they will be paying for a lot of it, and that there are some premiers that already support it. We know of Premier Horgan, but we don't don't know necessarily who the other premiers are. Again, as I said before, my guess is that depends a lot on who's footing the bill at the end of this. But this is a pretty significant piece of policy that the government is coming up with. And I don't just mean the Liberals in this case, but I mean in conjunction with the NDP. What the NDP did was predicate their support for the motion that the Liberals had put forward over the weekend about how they envision Parliament proceeding over the next number of months. And my sources in the government say that now, because of what's happened today with the NDP, they do expect a vote as early as tomorrow or by tomorrow on the motion going ahead. And that sort of sets out the design of Parliament. So the NDP said, if you want us to be on board with this, you're going to have to move ahead on 10 days of paid sick leave. And this is, as David and you have both outlined, very significant as we get into the process of reopening economies, and especially as we face the prospect of a second wave or a third or a fourth, albeit smaller wave in the future, or smaller waves in the future. And especially for people who are lower paid, who are more likely not to have any covered or paid sick leave. It's important that if they have any symptoms of illness, the biggest public health thing that you can do is stay home. And many are unable to do so because, of course, they would be forfeiting their pay. And so this is designed to mitigate some of that risk. Now, as you said, it's all about getting their ducks in the row. How fast can they get something like this done? I would point to the examples of the commercial rent program that we heard about today. I don't know how successful it will be, but it is a joint federal provincial endeavor, as was, for example, also topping up wages for essential workers. And jurisdictional issues certainly maybe delayed the conversation a bit, but it didn't prevent something from happening. So I don't see why there couldn't be in this case either.
Yeah, and if the target isn't until, after summer anyway, maybe, if it's to deal with the second wave. Although it does raise an interesting other question. The wage subsidy, the emergency relief benefit, those are things that you can understand are just for now. It might be a little bit more complicated to roll back paid sick leave, beyond COVID. Like maybe this is just something that becomes part of public policy in this country. And I don't know what the cost would be. I don't know what the dangers of that would be, but it's an interesting thought that is one of the public policy pieces that might be potentially a legacy of the pandemic, because it's connected to it, but it also speaks to a broader question, I think, of sick leave in this country and who gets access to paid leave and things like that. I don't know if, Ashley, if you want to wildly speculate with me.
Yeah, sort of. No, and I think actually that's also the question for the essential worker top-up, right? And I remember the government being asked that, and provincial governments, which some of whom moved ahead of the federal government and topped up wages for essential workers. The provinces decide who gets the extra pay, but the federal government helped contribute to it. You have to wonder, so it was for 16 weeks. At the end of 4 months, all of a sudden, because we're not in the acute phase of this pandemic, the people who work in long-term care homes don't deserve extra money. How do you all of a sudden say for this finite amount of time you can take paid sick leave, or you can get paid more for taking on such risk, but 6 months from now you're not entitled to that? It's a more difficult thing to do as compared to, as you outlined, the wage subsidy, for example, or the CERB. Okay, once you're hired back and you have employment, you probably don't need that. That's an easier sort of line to draw. But when it comes to paid sick leave or just pay for essential workers, it's a harder thing to claw back.
Yeah, and maybe it's not worth clawing back too. I mean, that's a conversation, government and society will have to have. David, speaking of wage subsidy, there were again questions about the political parties using the wage subsidy, which they, like, to be clear, I've already had some emails of people not happy about this, but they did meet the criteria for the wage subsidy. It's whether you think a political party should have access to that, I guess, is the question. And Jean Duclos said, listen, everybody's the same. Everybody needs help. I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but that is the perspective that he put forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. The questions about a lot of the government support programs have gone from why aren't you helping more people to why are you helping those people? And people are kind of upset that the big rich parties who fundraise quite well, the Liberals and the Conservatives are getting this, but also provincial parties. We know Jason Kenney's United Conservative Party is applying for the wage subsidy in Alberta. A couple of things on this. They have made the wage subsidy as broad as possible, except to public institutions, which is a tension point with municipal workers being in such dire straits right now because of the conversation about a larger financial package being required for cities and towns across the country. And they've tried not to single people out, which is why they've kept broadening the criteria of the wage subsidy to capture as many people as possible. You could make the political argument that they should have excluded political parties from this, so that the Liberals who are rolling out this program are not seen to be benefiting the party apparatus which supports them in their political activities, which is a legitimate point of view for people to express. But I suppose you could also argue, if you excluded political parties, maybe the Liberals and the Conservatives could ride it out, but you'd force the New Democrats and the Greens into a position of near utter bankruptcy and political destitution. The Bloc is sort of taking the easy moral high ground here, saying we're not going to take any of this money. Easy to do when you're really a provincial party that operates in national elections, but doesn't have the big sort of national party apparatus that the other political parties have that need to be supported. They mostly run on their constituency staff and whatever they get for their parliamentary allotment for having a certain number of MPs in the House of Commons. So the argument has been is that one job is just like another job. You know, people who work for the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party are no different than people who work at, say, Suncor, who are getting money right now through the wage subsidy, or the Toronto Blue Jays. You could have an argument about whether professional sports should be getting a subsidy in this. So not the headline I think they're looking for there, but again, when everybody is lining up for the same level of assistance, it's not like when we see the question period today, Andrew Scheer is going to be leading off demanding that they cut this subsidy, even though Aaron O'Toole and Peter MacKay, the front runners for Scheer's job, have said that they shouldn't be doing it and they should pay it back.
Yeah, and it becomes difficult as our colleague Aaron Wary, remember him? We haven't seen him in a long time, but he's still tweeting, and he made a good point on Twitter that if you start looking at the criteria like this, like in a values or ideological point of view, how do you set that criteria for everyone else? And maybe then it gets a little bit messy for everyone to be determining. Anyway, we'll see.
Can I jump in for just one quick second?
Yes, you can, of course.
I just think I think that there's totally a debate to be had around the merits, and I understand the discussions for and against that. I think the difference is I have interviewed Andrew Scheer and Jagmeet Singh multiple times when they were very much pushing for what made sense, which was an increase to that wage subsidy, 75%. Here's why it needs to help out more people. At no time did any of them say, oh, by the way, my own party's going to benefit from this? No,
that's true.
And I think it's the way in which this all came about, that it basically is, I mean, the NDP ended up being the most forthright, but even them, you know what I mean? It wasn't like anyone outlined this at the beginning, hey, by the way, we think this could work for us. I think if Canadians felt like they were being more transparent, the discussion right now might be a bit different.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Okay, I will tell people that there will be a question period today at 2:15, and Phil, my trusty producer, tells me it's the first question period in 75 days, because that's why I have him around. So since March 12th. So you can, I'm sure we'll have coverage of that later on CBC News Network and CBC.ca. Thank you, Vashi Kapelos and the CBC's David Cochran. You can watch Vashi on Power and Politics at 5 Eastern. Thank you. See you back here tomorrow. Appreciate it. As we talked a little bit about there throughout the past couple of hours, there are ongoing problems with testing in Ontario, and the province has been trying to make a push to do more. Premier Doug Ford is urging Ontarians to get tested, even if they don't have symptoms. We're going to hear more from the Premier and his officials today on that. It is a significant change, though, in messaging as the province gets ready to release this new strategy. Dr. Lawrence Lowe joins me now. He's the Interim Medical Officer of Health for the region of Peel. Nice to see you, Doctor.
Hi, nice to be on.
So I'm going to start with just what I see as sort of a worrying trend in Ontario, and that is that the numbers don't seem to be going down anymore. How concerned are you about that?
Well, certainly it's a concern, and I think it's a recognition that across the province we're really starting to see multiple pictures in different regions. Specific to what we're seeing in Peel, we do know that we have started to see our 7-day moving average of new cases increase, and we are also starting to see ongoing transmission in the community, which certainly is giving us pause as the province continues to reopen. At least in our community, it's clear that the picture is moving out of step with sort of the phased reopenings that have occurred so far.
So in the briefing today with the numbers, the broad provincial numbers in Ontario, they did say that there are 61 now what they call outbreaks. Those would be things, yes, associated with congregate living hospitals, but it would also be things like barbecues, family gatherings. How much of a concern is that in your region, that this is, because as you said, increased community transmission, people starting to not follow public health advice?
I think it really is. It really speaks to the need for people, especially as the reopening continues to occur, to remember that they need to remain physically distanced and they need to be practicing good hand hygiene. I think one of the challenges we have in the region of Peel is that our employment profile, many of our workplaces, our offices, are places where people can't work remotely, and people actually have to go in. If you think about manufacturing, warehousing, those kinds of employment pieces. And it's really the idea that things are, COVID-19 is still circulating in our community. Things are far from returning back to normal. It's a matter of people just making sure they're still taking the same precautions that we have been speaking about over the last couple months.
So what should Ontario do? What are your concerns then as we still move ahead with reopening, although we don't have sort of the next phase lined up from the government yet? What are your concerns around reopening given these numbers?
Well, I think I actually really do welcome the recent loosening of restrictions around testing. It's an opportunity for us to really think in a wholesome way around people that may need to be tested in our region, and I think it allows us to then really come up with a bit of a strategy to target where we're seeing those outbreaks. In certain workplaces, in certain sectors, in certain neighborhoods, or amongst certain parts of our community, where we can really make sure we get in there. Because I think the important thing to remember, you had mentioned testing numbers sort of being down. The big thing is to make sure that we're testing smart where we ought to be testing, to make sure that we're identifying and interrupting chains of transmission.
So once you get more people who are sort of voluntarily showing up to get tested, and you get a sense of where it is, what do you do as a public health official then to sort of quash that spark of the virus? What do you do?
Absolutely. It basically comes back to it's the function of testing, tracing, isolating, and treating, right? And so once we've gotten a positive coronavirus test, public health, as always, follows up with that individual to determine where they may have acquired the disease from, and also to determine who they may have passed it on to as contacts. And that is essentially bread and butter public health. And so through contact tracing, making sure that those individuals are isolated, we actually do manage to try to stamp out the isolation. But it really begins with a test, and it really begins with testing amongst populations, amongst people who are at risk, just to make sure that that we're able to identify any chains of transmission there.
So obviously it's a really different picture in the rest of the country. I only have about 30 seconds, Doctor, but what would you say to Ontarians? They had, a lovely weekend of good weather, and some people may be pushing the envelope a little bit on the public health advice.
I mean, I would just simply say, the COVID-19 is still very much a threat in Peel region and, throughout other parts of the province. And it's a matter of making sure that we keep our distance, avoid crowds, avoid congregating, wash our hands. We in public health will do our part with the testing and tracing and working with our healthcare partners.
Okay, Dr. Lowe, so good of you to make the time. I really appreciate your perspective today. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
You too. Stay healthy. That's Dr. Lawrence Lowe, Interim Medical Officer of Health for the region of Peel. As we know, we are expecting more details today about that testing strategy from the Premier. There you can see on the left-hand side. And Quebec also an update coming at 1 p.m. as though two provinces continue to struggle with more cases. Andrew Nichols will continue our coverage here on CBC News Network. I'm Rosemary Barton. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Thanks for watching.